Jaron Jarvis Channel, Top 20 Scary Stories of the Day from Reddit nosleep. 2018-09-17. Story 1, Don't Look Up. Don't look up. I stared at the text, unsure of what to think. The number was unknown, and for a moment I almost replied, but settled on it probably being spam. The sound of a car horn caused me to jump, and I quickly grabbed my phone and hurried down the stairs. Yo man, we've been waiting for 3 minutes, what gives? Peering at the rolled-down window, I gave my friend Jackson a teasing grin. Gotta look my best to impress, right? He scanned my outfit, which consisted of a simple black t-shirt, my favorite brown leather jacket, and skinny jeans. Dude, nobody's gonna give a shit what you wear. Leave him alone man, you wish you could be as fly as Owen. Or, thanks Dev, I appreciate it. Y'all so gay. Hi to you too Kelly. Kelly blew a puff of her cigarette and patted the seat next to her. Circling Jackson's hot red Mustang, I climbed into backseat next to Kelly, the strange text I had received moments earlier having already escaped my mind. Bro, I hope those twins are there again. That night was wild man, Devin chortled, resting his arm out the window. Let's not exaggerate, Jackson replied. Devin turned to him with an offended glare. What? You think I didn't smash that? Bro, I had both of them worshipping my dick like it was a popsicle and they were stranded in a desert. Kelly rolled her eyes and brushed some of her curly red hair behind her ear, using her phone to check the dark eyeliner and eyeshadow she had put on. You had a threesome with twins? Devin gave me wink. He's bullshitting, like he could get a girl, let alone two, Kelly jabbed. He's just trying to make you jealous. Shut the fuck up Kelly, you're just hating because who said I was hating? I'm simply stating the fact that if a girl had to pick between you and Jabba the Hutt, you know she's gonna be riding that slug dick. I made a gagging noise at the image while Jackson gave a laugh. Devin huffed and turned towards the view outside the car. I joined him, glancing up at the sky which was crystal clear, marveling at the thousands of stars that littered the blanket of darkness. It wasn't long before we heard the sound of rave music and began searching for parking spots on the crowded street. Hope nobody is planning on taking a midnight stroll, Jackson muttered, parking in the small driveway of one of the houses lining the street. Jumping out of the car, I could see dozens of other shadowy figures making their way to the large house full of flashing lights, muffled music, and silhouettes of moving bodies in the windows. Yo, time to turn up. Devin whooped. As we got closer to the house, I recognized the tune of Boom by Tiesto, and my heart beat with anticipation. This was a night to party, drink, and have a good time. Forget school, forget homework, tonight, we were gonna get wild. Inside the house, the music was loud, and we had to shoulder our way through the dancing bodies to the drink table. The four of us gave cheers, before splitting apart. Devin went off to search for somebody to fuck, while Kelly went off to look for the weed. Jackson and I chilled near one of the windows, introducing ourselves to the people next to us. This is Owen, I'm Jackson. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too. This is Audrey, and I'm Beth. I eyed the two girls. Audrey wore a short purple dress with her brown hair tied in a messy ponytail. Beth had shoulder-length blonde hair, and she wore a glittery crop top with denim shorts. She gave me a big smile and batted her eyelashes, seemingly already a few drinks in. Pulling her to the side, we struck up conversation and I pretended like I was listening, waiting for the alcohol to kick in. It wasn't long before she was sticking her tongue down my throat and we were attempting to find a place that wasn't taken. We eventually stumbled into the upstairs bathroom and luckily, the two guys smoking inside voluntarily left after seeing the two of us were together. I usually don't do this, Beth hiccuped, attempting to take her shorts off. Me neither, I replied, tossing my jacket to the ground. Beth was still having trouble with her shorts and almost tripped trying to shimmy them off. I paused while unbuckling my belt. You good? I'm fine, she mumbled. I hesitated, but after a few seconds of having second-hand embarrassment, I knelt down and helped her pull them off, revealing her lacy white panties to stare in front of my face. Blushing, she backed up a bit and shyly took her top off, so that she was in nothing but her underwear. We didn't speak as I pulled my shirt off, and we pressed our bodies together in another heavy tongue-kissing session. I felt her hand grabbing at the growing bulge in my briefs and I let my hand travel down to grab her ass weight. We parted lips and I gave her a tipsy smile. What? Too fast? It's not that, I don't really. Before either of us could react, she was projectile vomiting right where my feet were. Stumbling back, I was glad I hadn't fully taken off my pants and shoes yet. I'm sorry. I really don't feel so. Another wave of vomit cascaded from her mouth and I took shelter on top of the toilet seat. She gave a few more coughs, and I took off half the roll of toilet paper so she could dab at her mouth. After a moment to collect herself and wash her mouth, she gave a sniff and I could see tears welling up in her eyes. Hey, don't worry about it, I soothed, gingerly stepping around the vomit so I could give her a hug. Beth didn't answer and just buried her head in my chest. After an awkward minute of silence, she wiped her tears and began putting her clothes on. I wasn't keen on being blue-balled, but I put on my own clothes as well, holding the door so she could slip out. Deciding that I would be the better man, I closed the door again and grabbed a towel to wipe up the vomit. Gagging the entire time, I eventually had wiped the floor clean, and tossed the dirty towel into the trash, knowing the owners probably wouldn't care. I better run into those twins after this, I muttered to myself. Opening the door, I expected to be met with a wave of bodies, but instead, the hall was empty. That was odd, but perhaps they had all moved downstairs. But as I slowly walked down the hall towards the stairs, I realized I didn't hear anyone. No laughing, talking, shouting, nothing, just the music that suddenly felt very distant. Confused, I made my way down the stairs, pausing to look around once I reached the bottom. Not a single person was there. Hello? I called out, more quietly than I expected. Clearing my throat, I tried again, louder this time. Hello? Not getting an answer, I checked my phone to see if maybe the cops had arrived while I was in the bathroom and they somehow had missed me. I was only in there for about 5 minutes by myself. I doubted even the police could clear a house that fast, but it was the only logical thing I could think of. Instead of a text from Devin, Jackson, or Kelly warning me about cops, I had another text message from an unknown number. Don't look up. What does that even mean? I asked the empty house. Glancing up at the ceiling, I didn't see anything odd, so I began walking to the kitchen when I paused at the large double glass doors to the backyard and pool. I could see people, and I felt a sigh of relief. Everyone had just gone outside, though it was still strange not even one person seemed to stay inside. Making my way towards the doors, the closer I got, the more I realized something was wrong. Nobody was moving. Not one person. It was kinda creepy seeing the silhouettes of dozens of people just standing perfectly still, their bodies illuminated by the outdoor pool and the lights streaming from the window. As I reached the doors, I noticed every single person was craning their necks to the sky. Hello? I slowly closed the door behind me, stepping out onto the small patio. Nobody moved or answered, their heads still pointed up. I was about to follow their gaze, when the text message I had received flashed in my mind. Don't look up. Feeling stupid, I decided to listen for whatever reason. Perhaps it was the odd sensation I was feeling or the fact that my gut was telling me it was the right thing to do, but I let my eyes stay fixated on the people around me. I could see them blinking and breathing, but they had no reaction to my presence. It was getting uncomfortably eerie, and it took a few deep breaths for me to even muster up the courage to touch someone lightly on the shoulder. They didn't move, and I gave a clap. No reaction. This is too weird, I whispered, realizing that suddenly I did not want to be here. It definitely wasn't a dream. Even a bit drunk I knew this was real. I didn't question if it was a prank or I somehow had something extra in my drink. I just wanted to get the hell out. Grabbing my phone, I texted Jackson. Dude, where are you? This is creepy AF, meet me at the car. I saw that there wasn't any signal, but hoped my text would still get through eventually. As I stepped outside, I was met with an image that somehow was so unsettling, I almost slammed the door. Dozens of people, some that had been at the party, others being people or families living on the block, were all standing outside, straining their necks to look at the sky. Some stayed on their lawns, others were in the street, but they all gazed at the stars like if fireworks were going off. I could see a little girl in her pajamas next to her dad, who was wearing nothing but his boxers, standing on the walkway of the house right across from me. Next to them, an old man and woman stood just outside their door. What the fuck is going on? Nobody was dead, there wasn't a giant monster, it was just people standing, yet it was the scariest thing I had ever witnessed. The moon and the stars easily illuminated them, and I could see their blank expressions as they stared up at who knows what. At this point, I was debating if I should call the cops, lock myself somewhere in the house and pray it ends, or try and get home. Checking my phone, Jackson hadn't responded, and I wondered if her and the others were also trapped, staring at the sky. Dreading the probable, I silently made my way around the house, searching to see if I could find them. My heart sank when I recognized Devin, who was near the pool. I found Kelly a few feet away, and Jackson near the side of the house. Jackson. Jackson. PSSST. Jackson. I hissed. He didn't react, and the sudden thought of them all possibly being dead hit me. Brain dead was the term, where your heart could be beating and your body still had the ability to breathe, but your brain didn't function, meaning you were basically dead. Terrified now, I just wanted to wake up and realize it had only been a horrible alcohol-infused dream. After a moment of not knowing what to do, I instinctively reached into Jackson's pockets and felt around for his keys. Grabbing them, I tried to ignore the bodies I passed as I raced to the car. Getting in, I breathed a sigh of relief as the engine started. Backing out of the driveway, I had to drive slower than normal as I navigated my way around people in the middle of the street. The more I drove, the more scared I became. Literally everyone was caught in the weird spell of looking up at the sky. I could tell that people had literally stopped their cars, got out, and looked up, because at one point I had to drive onto the lawn of someone to get around a car blockage. What is going on? I checked the radio, but every channel was static. Slowing down, I checked my phone, but there was still no signal. Ignoring the unsettling scenes all around me, I finally reached home. I wondered if my parents were looking at the sky as well. They were on a trip to New York, and if the whole world was like this, what would happen next? Why did it seem like I was the only one not affected? Surely the people inside weren't looking up when it had happened, they had to have walked outside in order to see the sky. And just looking up wasn't the trigger, since I had done it. Making sure the doors were locked, I ran to my room and checked my laptop. There was no Wi-Fi, nothing that could allow me to contact the outside world. I guessed the town police weren't gonna be any help either, and I paced my room wondering what I could do. Whatever was happening, it involved the sky, and somehow it could take hold without needing to be seen initially, as evidenced by everyone gathering outside. But why me? Why was I not drawn outside with them? My brain raced with possibilities, and I finally curled up in my bed, wrapping myself like a cocoon, and squeezing my eyes shut. The sound of my phone ringing caused me to give a groan of annoyance. Grabbing it, I yawned as I answered. Bro, where the fuck did you go last night? My fucking car was stolen. Relax, Jackson, I replied, giving my arms a stretch. I just used it to drive home. What the fuck, man? Why didn't you tell me? Because suddenly, the memories came flashing back and I bolted upright. Wait, Jackson? Yeah dude. What the fuck, we just had to call Kelly's brother to pick us up. Wait, you're alive? Yeah, why wouldn't we be? Dude, do you not remember last night? You mean the party? Yeah, I remember it. No, like the whole sky thing, huh? Dude, it was scary as fuck, literally everyone was outside staring at the sky. That sounds weird. But no, I don't remember it. But you were one of them, I literally saw you. You, Kelly, and Devin. Literally all of you, like the entire neighborhood. There was no signal, no radio, no internet, it was fucking terrifying. Maybe you were tripping? Dude, there's no way, I only had like 3 cups of alcohol, that's it. I know. What about you, what do you remember from last night? Well, I partied, got drunk, hooked up with a few girls, passed out, woke up, and found out my keys and car was gone. But that can't be, we were only there for like 3 hours before it happened. Dude, we were there all night. You sure you didn't take something? I fucking swear, that's weird. No shit. Does anyone else remember? Let me ask. No, none of us do. You sure you didn't take something? Or it wasn't a dream? 100%, it was not a dream and I wasn't tripping. Dude, I'll explain everything to you guys face to face. Meet me in 20 at my house, sure dude. Later. Bye. I sat in silence, bewildered at what had happened. After staring at my wall, I immediately jumped up and peered out my window. Everything seemed normal, cars were moving, the few people that were outside were gardening or walking their dogs, it was as if nothing had happened. Opening my laptop, I checked the local news. Nothing. I checked the world news. Nothing. I tried Google with no results, nobody on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram mentioned it either. Maybe it was a dream. How was it possible there was nothing on the incident when the entire town was part of it? Sighing, I wondered what everyone's reactions would be when I told them. They'd probably think I was dreaming or totally insane, but I was so sure it had happened, I'd bet my entire car savings money on it. Suddenly, I remembered the texts that had warned me. Opening my phone, I breathed a sigh of relief. The messages were still there. I wondered if you could trace an unknown number. Either way, I didn't want to look at the text, the unsettling feeling and images were scarred into my brain, and the texts weren't helping. Opening my window, I stuck my head out and took in the fresh air. Even with the sun shining brightly and people were going about their everyday lives, a part of me wondered if it could happen again. Dragging my eyes towards the sky, I stopped myself. This is stupid, nothing will happen if you look up. Even though my gut told me it would probably be fine, I didn't. Story 2, My Son's Nightmares. My son has had nightmares for a couple years now. I've taken him to psychologists and multiple doctors, but none of them have been able to help with the problem. They said could take a while to find the right medicine and even that will minimize the issue, but not cure it. My son and I have sat and discussed his nightmares on multiple occasions. The details in which he recounts are quite vivid. They're even enough to scare a seasoned horror veteran like me. What has me concerned more than anything is I'm afraid his nightmares have begun to show some truth to them. The other night he had a dream a woodman was strangling him and I woke to find he had splinters in his neck. It took nearly an hour to remove them with a flashlight and tweezers. They were so stuck in his neck with every removal blood was drawn. The next night he had another nightmare. I awoke in the middle of the night to his screams for help. My heart sank as I ran to his room. As soon as I turned on the light I saw what he was screaming about. Bites which had swelled up covered him from head to toe. The strange thing is there was no bugs or anything in his room that would have caused this. After taking him to the doctor I was told it was fire ants and to apply medicine to the affected areas. Feeling helpless and without a solution, I did the next logical thing I could think of. I hired a priest to come to my home. Maybe just maybe if it wasn't emotional, physical, it could be spiritual. He blessed both my home and my son, but reported he found nothing demonic or evil residing in our house. So now what? Do I just sit by on the side hoping against hope the problem solves itself? The answer to that question seems obvious to me. I continue to fight for my son until these nightmares which are bleeding into reality stop for good. 2 weeks pass without a single incident. The nights have actually become pleasant again and we've both caught up on some much-needed sleep. My hope has been restored and the feeling of helplessness has faded away along with his nightmares. Until last night. He doesn't recall the events of his dream, but there was blood running from the front door to his bed. What scared me most is it wasn't his. Somebody got hurt and my biggest question was who? The thought of keeping him awake has even crossed my mind, but of course that would only be a temporary fix as he would need to sleep eventually. What if I sit by his bedside and watch as he sleeps? Could that solve the problem? As soon as something begins to happen I can shake him awake to stop the dream. Tonight I'll try that and report back to see if it works. Story 3, I've lost my sister. My sister was in a deep depression. She had given up on life and was an empty shell, barely even going through the motions. I can't say that I fully understood, but I had empathy. I certainly couldn't blame her after what had taken place. 2 years ago Alice was happy. She had a wonderful husband and a beautiful daughter, Beth. As my niece began school, my sister decided she would finally end her time of being a stay-at-home mom and get a part-time job for a little extra spending money. Such a normal thing, and none of us knew how horribly wrong it would turn things around. Alice got a job at this small dental clinic in town. She loved the staff and it was good for her to be out of the house. But a few months after she started, the flowers, gifts, cards and letters began to come. At first they were sweet in an odd way. Just telling her she was nice, pretty, kind. Telling her to have a good day, etc. All anonymous. Then they began to come almost daily and their tone began to shift. The secret admirer knew things about her life, what she ate for dinner, what movie she watched that day, what time she went to bed, etc. He began to profess his undying love and grew angry that she was wasting her time with her husband and that she didn't magically know who her secret admirer was somehow. She quit her job. She started to become a recluse, never wanting to leave the house. The police couldn't do much without knowing who was sending it, and there were no clear signs. Until about 8 months ago, when he broke into her house. He had run a small sandwich shop across the street from the clinic she worked. The office would often order lunch from there. Alice was apparently the one to pick up the order. She was nice to him and he began stalking her. That morning he broke in. He killed her husband right in front of her. Bashed his head in with a bat. Then he went after her with a knife. She had a few bruises and cuts and a broken arm, but physically she would be okay. Luckily a neighbor heard the commotion and called the police. He went out suicide by cop, but at least it saved her from having to deal with a trial. By chance or planning, he had waited until Beth had left for school, and while she had lost her dad, she at least wasn't harmed and didn't witness it. Alice was never the same after that, though. Who could be? I knew she blamed herself, as if it was something she did to lead him on and make him do that. She refused to talk about any of it, though. I did convince her to see a therapist, but she only went to 3 sessions before saying it wasn't helping. I didn't know what to do. I felt helpless. I hoped and prayed that she would snap out of it for Beth's sake at least. Fake it until you make it, perhaps? I tried to help. I'd stop over daily and help with Beth and around the house. But over time I got busy with my job and life and went over less and less. I admit it was hard seeing her like that and knowing nothing was helping. We were sisters and best friends and I wasn't there for her. So I felt instant guilt and regret when one evening Beth called me saying she was hungry. They had no food in the house. When I asked where her mom was, she said in bed and she wouldn't get up. I rushed over. The house was a mess. The kitchen was covered in dirty dishes, spilled cereal and milk that Beth had mostly been living on. Dirty clothes covered the floor. The lights were off. She hadn't paid the bill. I found my sister asleep in bed. She was physically okay, though perhaps dehydrated and dirty. Emotionally she was gone. Thank God my wife was understanding. I barely got the words out of my mouth when Jill told me to bring them home. They would stay with us. So after grabbing a few of their things and stopping for takeout for Beth's empty belly, I took them home. Alice didn't get better being with us. It was tense. We all felt we had to walk on eggshells, afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing. She would go from crying to outbursts of rage, but most of the time she just was lifeless. Jill had a college friend who was now a therapist and we asked her for advice. Sadly there was no easy fix or magic pill. My sister had to want to get better, we couldn't force it. But she did suggest that we try to get her to give us temporary custody of Beth and see if we could get her to voluntarily check herself into the hospital. If not, if we did believe she may harm herself, we could fight for it. That night after putting Beth to bed, I confronted Alice. She did not take it well. Things got heated. I screamed at her that she had to get over this and move on, if not for herself, for Beth. Beth lost her dad and now her mom as well. It was a slap in the face. I knew it stung. Maybe nothing else could reach her, but that did, and I knew it was fresh pain. I felt it too in my own heart. She stood there for a moment, tears streaking down her face, just staring straight ahead through me. She asked to borrow my car, saying she just had to drive and clear her head to think. She hadn't left the house in so long. I thought it was a positive sign and said yes. 3 days went by and she hadn't returned. We called every hospital looking to see if she showed up daily. Jill wanted to go to the police, but I was worried and guilt-ridden. I didn't want to get the police involved or CPS, that would also need to be. I just prayed she was okay and safe. I didn't care about my car, I just wanted Alice back. This morning I woke up later than usual. I heard music and chatting voices coming from the kitchen. As I peeked in to see what was going on, there stood Jill sipping coffee, Beth laughing while dripping syrup down her chin, and Alice, smiling and dancing around the kitchen happily. I thought I was dreaming and almost pinched myself. "Hi," I croaked out in surprise. "There is Sleeping Beauty awake at last." Alice giggled while rushing to me, pulling me up into her arms for a warm hug. "I made waffles. If Beth leaves any syrup for anyone else, you can have some." Laughter filled the air and I wanted to smile, but I was confused. "Where have you been? Are you all right?" I stumped forward, gulping down the awaiting glass of orange juice to clear my throat. "I told you, I had to clear my head. I drove out to the desert and thought, prayed, meditated. Whatever you want to call it. I better now." Was she on drugs? I'm by no means an expert. But I don't think anyone can go from what she was before to this in a few days. It takes time to heal. Was this denial? But hadn't I been the one to think fake it until you make it? Maybe that is what she was doing. Maybe later I could approach her about the hospital or at least therapy again. Not now in this joyful moment though. Why don't I go help Beth get cleaned up before I hop in the shower, and then we can do something nice together today? Sound good? I asked as I helped Beth down from the chair, making sure her sticky little hands were contained. Everyone nodded happily and I couldn't help but smile. As I escorted Beth to the bathroom, I noticed she seemed to change drastically. Her smile was gone and she lost the pep. Once we had gotten down the hall alone, I asked, "What's wrong, honey? Are you happy to have your mom back? She seems to be doing a little better right now." "That's not my mom." Her little 7-year-old voice had a rumbling anger that was bizarre coming from a child, and it caught me off guard. I stopped and knelt down in front of her. "Beth, I know this has been hard and your mom has been through a lot. She has changed a lot recently, but she loves you and I know she wants to get better for you." "No, I mean that lady is not my mom. She is wearing her face, but I can tell she is just pretending. I think my mom is dead now." "Don't tell her. I think she would be angry." My jaw hit the floor and I couldn't find any words. There were no words for that. Beth turned and walked to the bathroom, leaving me sitting in the hallway alone. After my shower, I managed to pull Jill aside and tell her what Beth had said. "Kids know and understand things way more than we think. Beth has been through a lot too. She lost her dad and then her mom was just so not there for her. I'm sure it's taken its toll on her too. Now poof, her mom disappears for days with no word and then returns acting completely different. It's too much for her." Jill threw her hands up in the air and signed before coming and taking my hands in her own. "I think we forgot to worry about Beth as much because of everything going on with Alice and because Beth genuinely didn't seem that affected by it. But I think she was far more than we realize. I think I should ask Marie for some recommendations for some child therapists to have her talk to someone who is trained to deal with this sort of thing." I hugged Jill deeply and kissed her. She was my voice of reason always. "As always, my love, you are right. I think that's a good idea." That afternoon we had decided we would go for a walk and have a picnic over at the park. I went to go check if Alice was ready to go, and as I went to knock on her door I noticed it was already open a crack. As I reached to open it, my eyes caught something. It was probably the shadows or light or my eyes playing tricks. Because what I saw wasn't possible. Darkness distorted around her frame, halting and lurching forward as if trying to catch up to her movements. As if light and shadows were out of sync around her aura. Her body was bent and twisted out of shape where she stood. Her head twisted and fallen to the side, her left arm swung loose as if out of its socket. Her back was to me, but as she began to turn I quickly leapt around the corner, hopefully before she had a chance to see me. I think Beth is right. I don't think that is my sister. Story 4, The Tomb of the Warrior. Missing Persons Report. Date, September 28, redacted. Name, Daniel M. Redacted. Age, 33. Race, see location, redacted. Height, 6 feet 3 inches. Weight, 215 pounds. Officer responding, Tyson. Synopsis, while staying at, redacted, resort, missing individual departed on hike and has not returned. Missing individual is an experienced hiker and was well prepared for outdoor exercise. S&R coordinating. Missing individual report number 834 opened. Maybe I should back up to the beginning. I never liked hiking. So obviously I married a guy who loved it. This was something we negotiated along the way. A few times a year we'd go on vacation to some remote spot. He'd spend his days hiking through the hills, and I'd spend my days in the spa. Honestly, it worked out well. He even customized some gatenas so we could talk when we were out in the middle of nowhere. Seriously, what is with the cell reception? When I got pregnant, we planned a great trip. It was a location he'd wanted to visit for years, and had a really nice resort for me. For the terms of my settlement I'm not allowed to name it here, but it was in the western US, and required a lengthy drive from the airport. The first few days were glorious. We had dinner every night, and it was exactly as relaxing as I hoped it would be. Danny got to hike some beautiful trails around the area, and was narrating a book idea that he felt was going really well. It was perfect. Video evidence. Police log, 38,275-1. Length, 537. Comments, missing individual 834 seen departing side entrance of hotel en route to parking lot. MI 834 stops and talks to unknown individual, S1. S1 is wearing maroon jacket identifying him as employee of resort, though review of past and present employees has not located a match. The two individuals talk briefly and then depart in separate directions. I still remember Danny coming back from the parking lot excited. He had run into an employee who asked about his hikes, and told him about some cool site called the Tomb of the Warrior. Native American or something, but not included on any of the maps of the area because they were worried about damage from too much foot traffic. I laughed at how excited he seemed over it all night. There was apparently a small trail right behind the hotel that would bring him there. He checked his gear and I giggled at how thrilled he seemed by it all. It was a good night. The next morning after breakfast he gave me a kiss and took off. I tried him on the Gatena a few times but just got static and wound up falling asleep. When I woke up late that afternoon and hadn't heard anything I got more and more concerned. I finally had the resort call the police when he wasn't back by nightfall. It was a nightmare. Video evidence. Police log, 38,275-2. Length, 537. Comments, missing individual 834 is seen walking from the hotel along back of property line and out of sight towards woods. Patrol found one small trail that leads 50 feet into forest before terminating. MI 834 is not seen again from this camera angle. The next day was the worst of my life. No one could find my husband that night and search and rescue wouldn't start until the morning. Worse, no one knew about anything called the Tomb of the Warrior, even locals who hiked a lot. I was worried he was hurt or had been attacked by an animal. Still they mapped out where he could have been and had volunteers all over the next day. But nothing, not a sign of him anywhere. I was beside myself. Both our parents flew out to try to keep me calm. The next morning I woke up to static from the Gatena. I kept shouting into it and then got a response. I wept when I heard Danny's voice. I'm a little hurt, sitting in our car using first aid kit. I rushed to the parking lot. I was confused by all the people from search and rescue who still seemed to be working. He's sitting in the parking lot. But when I got to the car he wasn't there. I was frantic, and then opened up the trunk to find his voice recorder and guitar, along with a bloody shirt. Date, September 30th, redacted. Police report, Officer Graff responded to wife of missing individual 834 who was hysterical in parking lot. Upon speaking, individual claimed MI-834 had spoken to her from parking lot. A search of her car located 3 items that were not present when car was searched on morning of the 29th of September. Search and rescue has been present in parking lot since that time, and personnel indicated it was highly improbable car was accessed without notice. Items seized: 1 two-way radio, 1 digital recorder, 1 shirt. Shirt is torn and has liquid on it consistent with blood. Sent for analysis. The search continued for another week before they called it off. My dad called in a lawyer they knew and the hotel chain flew in a team to negotiate a quick settlement. Pregnant woman loses husband after hotel staffer sends him on a mystery hike. Sounds bad, even if they claimed the guy who sent him out didn't really work for them. I never listened to the tape. My father-in-law did. He was in the Navy for years and I figured he could handle it. He came back looking awful, said it was confusing to hear, and didn't have any clues that could help. So, 2 weeks later I flew home to give birth. I was now rich, and also absolutely baffled about how I was supposed to live after losing my soulmate. It was such an awful time, I had no idea what was supposed to come next. Audio evidence. Police log. 38,275 to 3. Length, 8:17 and 52 seconds. Comments, recovered from digital recorder linked to missing individual 834. Large sections of time are linked to narrating an idea for a novel. Those sections have been redacted. It appears recorder was running for entire time MI-834 was hiking. 0:10 and 32 seconds, not sure where I'm supposed to go here, path just ends, oh never mind, that was dumb of me. 1:23 and 7 seconds, can't believe I can see the hotel from here. Where is this path when I'm there? I don't remember a mountain in this direction. Weird. Seems farther away than it should be. Alice, can you hear me? Alice? Maybe the rocks are kicking off some interference. 3:45 and 13 seconds, just made it to another lookout and nothing seems familiar. Can't see anything I recognize. It seems like I've only been gone a little but my watch is telling me a lot more time has passed. Feeling strange. Not sure if I should turn back. 4:52 and 38 seconds, Alice, are you there Alice? Damn it. Alice, I think I got turned around, are you hearing me? I tried to turn back and wound up right back where I was. Going to keep going and see if there is another way out. Analyst note, from 4:57 and 32 seconds to 8:12 and 14 seconds there are a variety of voices that do not appear to be MI-834. First is over an hour of hysterical laughing, voice is very deep and appears male. The second voice appears to be a young female who repeats the words just keep going. He waits over and over. Finally a deep male voice speaks an unknown language at length. Analysis by University of, redacted, Language Department indicates it is not a known language but bears hallmarks of a real language and does not appear to be gibberish. 8:12 and 14 seconds, I'm here. I made it. How long has it been? It seems darker than it should be. Alice, can you hear me? This is incredible. No wonder they want to protect it. Look at the stones, the circles. This is gorgeous. I need to work this into the book. Is it a monument of some type? I don't understand what it is. What are the carvings? Why is everything moving? Why is it so warm? What? Oh. It's opening. It's beautiful. It's, oh God, it's not what I thought it was. Screaming. Crunching, followed by wet slurping noise. Recording ends. After the baby, Danny Jr., was born, I sold our house. It was too sad to stay there. We traveled the world. I couldn't stand the thought of working, and I had the money to travel. We did that for 2 years, touring the world before I came home to try to restart life. I bought us a little townhouse and decorated it perfectly. I covered the walls with pictures of my adventures with Danny Jr. As I settled in, I finally decided to invite some old friends over. My friend Jenna was the first to come over. We chatted and she played with Junior until it was time for his nap. I left her looking at pictures in the living room and went to make tea, but when I came back she had left unexpectedly. I called for days before she finally answered. Jesus Alice, I know you went through a hard time but those pictures are messed up. Get a therapist. Then she hung up on me. I walked into the living room. Me and Danny Jr. in Paris, in Brussels, in Hong Kong, in Cartagena, at the Grand Canyon. Gorgeous shots. Nothing disgusting, just a mother and a son in some beautiful spots. I tried to call Jenna back but she didn't answer. I couldn't figure out what she was so offended by. That night I looked at the pictures again, looking for a clue of what could have made her so mad. I first saw him in the background of a picture in Paris. My husband, Danny. Once I saw him in one, the others jumped out. He was in every single picture I had taken, somewhere in the background behind me and Danny Jr., and in all of them he was screaming. Story 5, I don't even know what just happened. I just smoked my third cigarette and I figured I had to write this all out. I don't really even understand what just happened, but I guess I just teleported. I work as a field service technician for a networking company. My job mostly consists of responding to service calls dealing with issues with our system. Usually Monday through Friday we stay busy being proactive and visiting our customers and addressing any concerns they have, and on weekends we alternate who has to be on call. Normally when you are on call you can either treat it like a normal workday or just stay at home and respond to any service call that pops up. I am on call this weekend and I elected to do the latter. I've just been at home being a bum all day waiting for the wife to get home so we could go to dinner together. So the wife finally gets home from work and after forcing me to work out with her we take turns showering, then get dressed and head out for dinner. On the way out she lets me know her friend is gonna be meeting us at the bar for dinner and drinks. I didn't mind. Her friend is tolerable. So as soon as we get to the bar her friend is already there with a table for us already, and we decide to play some shuffleboard while we wait for the waitress to place our drink order. As soon as we get to the shuffleboard my work phone begins to ring and sure enough it's my boss letting me know I had a service call. I told him I had just stepped out for dinner and if I could eat before I go, and he said it wasn't an urgent call but they did want someone out there to nigget. I hang up and my wife is giving me that knowing look. You got a call, huh? Yay, but it's not a rush or anything. We can all eat and y'all can have some drinks before I got to get going. So we ordered some awesome bar pizza and my wife and her friend ordered a few drinks before we headed home so I could change and jump in my work truck and head to the call. The location was a solid hour-and-a-half drive away. Before leaving town I stopped at the gas station and bought a Monster, a new pack of smokes and a bag of Gardettos, then filled up the truck with fuel. I cranked up the radio and lit up a cigarette and started my 90-minute road trip. Sometimes I don't mind the late-night calls. Some of our customers are in such remote areas that you get a clear view of the night sky full of stars, and I still think it's awesome to look up and stargaze for a while. So I get to the location in an hour and 15 minutes. I might have been speeding a little bit but that's besides the point. So I fix the issues. Replace a few parts. Calibrate a few sensors. It takes me roughly 2 hours and I'm wrapping up the job. So I'm leaving the location and it starts to drizzle off and on a little bit. As I drive further from the location the rain really starts to come down harder. The radio suddenly goes to static so I lower it down. It's pitch black outside and my bright lights are only reflecting off the raindrops, making visibility even worse. So I'm driving with my low beams and the rain is coming in torrents. Then it starts to hail and I could feel the truck sway from gusts of wind, so I slowly crept to a stop and turned on my hazard lights, deciding to just wait out the storm before driving off again. I checked my phone and of course had no service, but I remember seeing the time and thinking I had left the rig half an hour ago and I should have been home by 4 a.m. but with the storm stopping me I probably won't make it until 4:30 a.m. Then the lighting hit. Well, I think it was lighting. I just remember a really bright flash of light that I can still see when I squeeze my eyes shut tight, then a loud thunderous clap/boom sound, and then the feeling of my stomach turning as if I was on a tall roller coaster that just went into its first drop, and I blacked out. When I finally came to, my first thought was that I hate the song on the radio. Then I realized I was driving again. Then I got really confused. I checked my phone and it had only been 3 minutes since I had last checked it. When I finally realized where I was on the road, I was 2 hours away on the other side of the county, driving away from where I lived. I pulled off to the side of the road and smoked a few cigarettes, trying to figure this whole thing out. I'm freaking out. I don't feel safe to drive the half hour it would take me to make it home. But I wouldn't even know how to explain what happened. I don't think anyone would believe me. We mess around with each other enough that they would all tell me to go fuck myself, especially calling at this time of night. It's frustrating. I'm on the verge of tears, but I don't get why. I'm just freaked out. I'm gonna smoke another cigarette then drive home. I just hope I'll be able to sleep once I get home. Story 6, Dante's Rig. Have you ever heard about the Well to Hell? The Well to Hell was thought to be an urban legend regarding a borehole in Russia which was drilled so deep that it broke through into hell itself. The Soviet Union had in fact drilled a hole more than 12 kilometers deep, but claims of the supernatural were thought to be fabricated by a Finnish Christian group who published the story in 1989 as proof of the existence of hell. The Kola Super Deep borehole officially remains the deepest hole ever drilled. But what if I told you that the government of the Russian Federation authorized a classified drilling operation whose mission was to uncover and document the truth about what's below 12 kilometers? 0 kilometers. Attention on the rig. Pre-drilling procedure about to commence. All non-essential personnel please stay clear of the rig floor. Hey, Mr. Texas. Igor called out. In Soviet Russia, hole drills you. Igor was one of the rig's roughnecks, and that fat bastard loved the in Soviet Russia jokes. Dante's rig was isolated in the East Siberian taiga, where temperatures could range between 21 degrees Fahrenheit and -58 degrees Fahrenheit. The government of the Russian Federation, damn commies if you ask me, wanted the best of the best for their ambitious operation, and that included enlisting the help of a certain mudlogging geologist from Texas. I flipped the bird in air as I walked past Igor on the deck. A mudlogger might sound like the name of a terrible death metal band, but it's not. The geological expert is responsible for gathering, examining and monitoring information pertaining to drilling operations. The laboratory where I worked was perched just high enough to have a view the boreal forest that surrounded the rig. That night I took a moment to appreciate the contrast of the chaotic commotion of the rig, and the stillness of the forest shrouded in darkness. Through the chaos of the rig, I thought I could hear hundreds, possibly thousands of crows cawing and noisily flapping their wings. It was an omen that foreshadowed the terror which would come. 3 kilometers. Claystone peppered with limestone. I muttered as I examined the geological sample under the microscope. And what appears to be clunk. Fuck. I cursed as something slammed against the window. Perhaps it was my irritation of being interrupted, but I wasn't in a good mood. Clunk. Hesitantly I opened the door. 2 crows laid on the ground with both necks in an unnatural position. The rig manager, Mr. Yuri Sergeyevich, was squatted next to one of the birds as he looked up at me, and then glanced at the window. I was just coming to see you, Texas, when I saw these two. In Russia, it's considered very bad luck if a bird taps on your window. People believe it's an omen of death. It's probably worse if a bird crashes into your window. Then, Mr. Sergeyevich burst into laughter. I'll have Igor dispose of the birds for you, but do you have the report for tonight? Fucking Russians, they're pessimistic when things go well, but they have fucking jokes when things go wrong. Yes sir. We're still drilling through the claystone formation, but we're starting to see some limestone. Also, I've noticed a strange red residue with the latest sample. 6 kilometers. Unknown residue continues to darken in its hue. I notated when I heard the door open, close, and a figure walked past behind me. Hey Boris. I called out. Any update on what this residue is yet? Are the roughnecks using some new chemical? Silence. Boris was the mudlogger during the day. I assumed he simply forgot something in the laboratory, but no one was there when I looked up. I took a glance at the door, then looked back at the unlit corner of the laboratory. A chill tingled down my spine. Boris? I thought I saw a silhouette about the size of a child standing in the shadows. Cautiously my fingers felt along the wall until finding the light switch. Without taking my eyes off the silhouette, I clicked on the lights and nothing. I was alone in the laboratory. I didn't tell Boris what happened when he arrived later that morning. I haven't been sleeping well, and I probably had a one beer too many the day before. Instead, I went straight to bed. I woke up a few hours later needing to take a piss. I sat at the edge of the bed for a brief second before making my way to the restroom. After I relieved myself, I turned on the faucet and looked at my reflection. What I saw instead was a child with hallowed eyes standing in the mirror. He screamed. And I woke up nearly startled out of bed. 9 kilometers. The crew of Dante's rig stood silently around the mud pit. The mud pit is simply a large rectangular steel tank that flowed with the drilling fluid. What should have looked like a chocolate milkshake was replaced by a thick red liquid that oozed from the mud pump. The morale around the rig had declined with each kilometer, but the sight before us now was a terror that shook us to the core. Be back to work, guys. Mr. Sergeyevich croaked, but his eyes remained fixated on the mud pit. You heard the boss. Back to work. Back to work, guys. Igor ordered. With his natural energetic persona of authority, the crew chief rallied his crew and the rig exploded back to its chaotic routine. You hear that too? Mr. Sergeyevich asked as I stood next to him. I could hear it. Through the thunderous rumbling of the rig, we thought we heard faint whispers emanating from the mud pit. 12 kilometers. 12 kilometers. The rig had entered an unknown geological formation. Contaminated with the red fluid, I couldn't accurately analyze the sample. The Russian government had enlisted the most qualified professionals in their fields. We were enlisted for one specific job, and all hands were on deck as we neared the depth that Kola Super Deep Borehole encountered the phenomenon. All measurement reporting in the green, Boris notated. It was at that moment that the first alert was registered on our equipment. The drill bit suddenly began to rotate wildly. 2000 degrees Fahrenheit recorded at the 12-kilometer mark. I called out. 11 kilometers and rising. 2000 degrees Fahrenheit recorded at the 9-kilometer mark. I often think back about what I did next that night. Perhaps I did save the lives of those on the rig floor, because the next thing I remembered was broadcasting over the intercom system. Attention on the rig. Evacuate the rig floor. I repeat. Attention on the rig. Evacuate the rig floor. 2000 degrees Fahrenheit recorded at the 6-kilometer mark. Evacuate the rig floor. Evacuate the rig floor. 3 kilometers. 2 kilometers. 1 kilom. A blast of searing heat gushed out of the hole, and faint sound could be heard echoing from the well. At first, it was a distant but high-pitched sound, but the sound increased each passing second until it reverberated across Dante's rig. I could hardly believe my ears. It sounded like thousands, perhaps millions of suffering souls crying and shrieking in unending torture. The tormented screams of the damned could be heard echoing through the Siberian taiga, and thousands of crows cawing could be heard along with them. The rig exploded in a fury of shouts and confusion, but one particular roughneck went hysterical. Vasily! Igor cried out. Vasily, what are you doing? Vasily sobbed as he stumbled warily towards the well. I heard him. He wailed as tears flowed from his eyes. I heard him. He's down there. Heard who? Who's down there, Vasily? We could all hear the tormented cries, but handling this crisis allowed us to ignore, for however brief, the terror surrounding us. Ignorance is bliss. My baby brother. I can hear him. He's screaming. My God. He's screaming. He needs me. I stood in disbelief, unsure what to do, until a shadow emerged from the corner of my eye. My eyes flickered towards the movement and I saw the child from my nightmares standing next to me. He couldn't have been more than 12 years old. I noticed that he had a hole at the back of his head when suddenly he looked up at me. His eyes were nothing except empty eye sockets, and half of his jaw was missing while the other half hung limp. I glanced up at Vasily. He took one last step and simply vanished into the well. I looked around, but the child was gone too. Mr. Yuri Sergeyevich ordered the evacuation of Dante's rig shortly after the death of Vasily. Blood overflowed in each mud tank, and it eventually began to ooze out onto the snow. Lightning cracked, and the floodgates of heaven were open. The ground turned a light crimson red as the rain and blood were mixed together. Aftermath. Dante's rig now stands forgotten somewhere in the East Siberian taiga. A simple wooden cross stands guard over the well as a testament to Vasily Vasilyevich, and a brother's love that not even hell could break. I pray that you never discover that forsaken place. And I pray that you never experience what it's like to lose a loved one, and the bottomless hole that you're left with inside your heart. Story 7, Murder is a strange thing. Murder is a strange thing. Death, in itself, is nothing out of the ordinary. We cling, and cling, and cling to life until it ultimately leaves us, whether we want it to, or not. Because nature needs us to. We simply cannot go on forever. We tacitly accept these rules from the moment of our creation, and know, behind each smile, behind each session of small talk with a neighbor, every wedding, every birthday, every argument, every reconciliation, we know, that at the end, no matter the story, there is us, and there is death. Murder is unnatural. We expect death, even if we don't accept it, but we aren't prepared when someone else decides that fate is taking too long. If you think, right now, of how you might die, you'll get a small number of choices. Old age, for the optimist. Disease, for the realist. And accident, for the pessimist. Few say murder. We know it's out there, but it's always just that. Out there. Not here. Because here, we're all so busy clinging to life, that we don't notice when someone's about to cut our rope. And afterwards, once they figure out the simple who, and the how, only the why remains. What reasons are good enough, reasonable enough, believable enough, to explain a heart stopped, a brain dead, a corpse cold? In the olden days, humans would fill this gap in their logic with monsters, vampires, werewolves, and the like stories. Because the truth, it's just too much. Now that we're older, and wiser, and we've lost our naivety, we know what people are capable of. We know that there's no monster under our bed. The monsters are outside. Right outside. In some cases we know them. Others, we don't. They're alike, in that they're all clawing to get in, and sometimes, they do. And here's the irony, the bitter humor of it all. We've written off tales of ancient demons and replaced them with the reality of human nature. The real fears of yesterday are the hollow jokes of today. So, what happens when we meet a real devil? We make him human. Mary Parker died last Sunday. They found her at the bottom of the stairs in her house. They thought she'd fallen down. Broken her neck. At first, no one seemed to care. Mary had been sick for a while. Sick in the head. She was always shuffling around town, in her bright blue dress and matching bright blue shoes. Always bright blue. No one talked about it much. No one talked about her when she died, either. We all looked the other way. Until it got out. According to Dr. Harris, she died from too much blood in her brain. It had been there for a while, but last week it finally did what it was probably always going to do. But there were some inconsistencies. The angle, the timing, it was all wrong for a fall. There were a few twigs in her hair. Her dress had been dragged through some mud. There were bruises on her legs and forearms that resembled fingertips. In other words, she'd been put there. A fabrication. But why would someone try to cover up a brain hemorrhage? You can't murder someone with something inside their own head. Can you? Now they're listening. Now, they're paying attention. By they, I mean the rest of the town. They're curious, but they're not sad. The only one who was really say was Elliot Parker. Mary's brother. Older man, late 50s. A farmer who keeps to himself. A bit strange in the head, like his sister, always murmuring, always listlessly roaming around town. The days after Mary's death, he stayed shut up in his little farmhouse, refusing visitors. He was grieving. And, he was very strange. He's also a dead man, as of last night. The town is still trying to sort out what happened. The body, or rather what's left of it, has been taken away for examination, but the questions remain. I can hear them. How did it happen? Why did it happen? Or, most provoking, who made it happen? So many questions, and no one seems to have any answers. Except me. I can tell you the how and the who quite easily. It's the why that poses the problem. How did it happen? Fire. Who made it happen? Elliot Parker. How do I know this? I was there. I found him when I saw the smoke. I was on my way home from the shop when I saw it. It was dusk, and the sun set low over Elliot Parker's soybean fields. The smoke was trailing up in a black spiral up into the dim sky, and I could see it was coming from the top of the little shed near Elliot's house. I ran over without thinking. I wasn't too far from my house, and I thought it was best to make sure everything was all right. When I got to the shed, black smoke was still rushing out of the slats in the shed's roof. The door was slightly ajar. I called to Elliot, but received no answer. I could hear something crackling, popping, inside. Tools, I thought, being burned. I stepped back to go to the main house, to tell Elliot that his shed was aflame when he spoke. "Go away," he said. His voice came from inside. I asked him if he needed help, told him that the shed was on fire and he needed to leave. "Go away," he told me, more forcefully. I should have left. I don't know what possessed me in the next few moments. All at once, I thrust open the door to the shed. I felt the heat radiating within in hot, thick clouds. I squinted through the smoke, my eyes watering, and I saw him. Elliot Parker was inside the shed, bent over a huge fire that looked like he had made it himself. His back was to me. His hands were out to either side of the flames, dangerously close. I could see that they were painted, strange symbols on the backs of each one. I glanced nervously at a red container of gasoline in the corner, uncomfortably close to the flames. I wondered if it was empty. I looked up and saw things hanging from the ceiling. A dusty book, open, written in a language I didn't recognize. What looked like a cat's tail. And, amongst other things I won't mention here, one bright, blue, shoe. But, these weren't what interested me in that moment. I was busy staring at the fire. Well, not the fire itself. More specifically, what was being burned. Bones. The fire was stacked high with bones of varying length, some broken, some not. Some small, some large. Some so large that they had to have been from a big animal of some sort. If not an animal, then I should have left. But the fire was getting bigger, and Elliot Parker wasn't moving his hands. And, like I said, I didn't live too far away. I called his name again, but he didn't answer this time, not even to tell me to go. I crept closer, careful to keep away from the flames. I could see the side of his face then, smudged with dirt, presumably from the fields. His eyes were closed. His breathing was even, despite the smoke, and his lips were moving rapidly. I couldn't hear what he was saying over the crackle of the bones, but whatever it was, he was saying it fast. I said his name again, and again, he didn't respond. The air was so thick, and hot, and full of smoke that I coughed and my eyes burned, and finally, I held out my hand and put it firmly onto his shoulder. The canvas-like feeling of his shirt was rough and dusty and damp with sweat. With my touch, he whirled around. The creases of his face were lined with dirt from the fields, his mouth was still rapidly moving, but the most disturbing thing were his eyes. They weren't rolled back in his head, or completely filled in with an inky black, they were Elliot Parker's eyes. And yet, they weren't. I was right in front of him, but he wasn't looking at me. He was looking through me, somewhere beyond me. They were bloodshot, and tears streaked through the dust on his cheeks, yet they were wide open. I said his name again. This time, he answered. He said, "She's dead." I said, "Who?" He said, "Mary." I said, "Yes, we're all very sorry, but right now we should really get out of here, Mr. Parker." He said, "We're not." I said, "Not what?" He said, "We're not." Again, I asked, "Not what?" He said, "We're not sorry." I stared at him after he said that, a chill crawling up my spine despite the heat of the shed. He was still looking past me when he reached beside the fire and picked up the container of gasoline that had been in the corner. It looked like it had weight to it. I told him to stop, that it was dangerous. I took a step back. He said, "He helped me to do that, and he'll help me to do this, too." With that, as I watched in horror, Elliot Parker raised the canister of gas over his head, and gently doused his entire body with it. I was against the doorway now, the strong smell of the gas reaching my nose, further constricting my lungs. I made one last plea. Elliot Parker ignored it, or else, didn't hear it. Still facing me, he raised his arms to the sky. Slowly, he let himself fall backwards. This was where I started to run. There was a boom as Elliot Parker and his puddle of gasoline caught aflame, the thin slats of the shed roof falling as embers around me. I stood, alone in the field, and watched it burn. Then, I walked home. I didn't live too far away. Story 8, My House. My house was built in 1904. It is a single-family home, wood frame setting on a concrete block foundation. I have been living here for about 12 years. Of all the weird things that my siblings and me have seen or heard in this house, this one event is my favorite. This happened to my brother. About 10 years ago, my brother and his best friends had started a garage band playing mostly Spanish rock, alternative music but in Spanish. His friends could only get together on Sunday afternoons. They would practice into the early evening, and they would usually call it quits by 8 p.m. This was the time I usually showed up and went to bed, cause I worked the graveyard shift. This happened in late fall, so the days were getting shorter. They had just finished a long session when the decision to head to someone else's house came about. My brother handed his car keys to his buddies so they could load up the equipment. Everyone had filed out of the basement, but the tricky part was that they needed to walk all the way to the back of the basement, up the back stairs, through the kitchen doorway, down the hall into the living room and out into the front porch. Everyone was outside sitting in my brother's truck waiting for him. My brother was walking up the back stairs when he remembered that he had left his pancakes in a to-go container sitting on a speaker in the basement. He made the decision to go back. Now the basement is not clean, with full sight lines, there had been partitions made, and the boiler and main heating unit are right smack in the middle. So after my brother walks back, he is about to retrieve his food container, when out of the corner of his eye he sees it. It is a shadowy figure, right at his peripheral vision. This feeling of dread and uneasiness washed over my brother. We had been taught that if you are in the presence of a spirit or ghost and you felt a bad vibe, to say quick prayer or to cuss at it. My brother chose the latter. He basically just told it, "Hey, fuck you, I don't have time for this shit." My brother started to walk to the back of the basement and briskly up the stairs, closing doors and turning off lights as he was walking out. The last light switch is on the opposite side of the front door. Luckily the door was open and the light from the street lamp was flooding the living room with its amber light. My brother said he felt something at his back, but at no point did he turn around. As he flicked the last switch, the living room went dark, as did rest of the house. As he stepped out, he pulled on the door, closing it behind him. Still holding his food container in one hand, he jogged down the few porch steps. He walked towards the front gate. Our house resides far from the main street, essentially having a large front yard but no rear garage. As he closed the gap between himself and his friend-laden truck, he kind of smiled and thought things over in his head, mad at himself for spooking out when there was no reason. He climbed into the driver's side of the truck, putting on his seat belt and getting ready to pull out of the parking spot directly in front of the house, when one of his friends asked, "Hey, wait, what about your brother, isn't he coming with us?" My brother answered, "What do you mean? He went to work early tonight, he is already gone, do you see his car anywhere?" The next question they asked, so then who was walking behind you when you were leaving the house? Story 9, Mente Morte. I think my psychiatrist is trying to kill me. Okay, I know how that sounds, but hear me out. My name is Drew, I'm 26, and I have been recently diagnosed with comorbid schizophrenia and bipolar depression. I've known that something in my head was off for most of my life, but it wasn't until I attempted suicide a year ago that it became official, Drew the bipolar schizo. Anyways, back to the real issue at hand, my psychiatrist, Dr. Michael Morrison. I've been seeing him for about 4 months now, meeting on a semi-weekly basis. Each meeting goes the same: hello Drew, hello doc, how's the medicine working, great doc, and the voices, haven't heard 'em, and is anyone trying to hurt you? No, not this week, good, yeah? But recently, the meetings have been getting stranger. He has started asking very specific questions about them. Back before I was taking medicine, I was admittedly pretty delusional. There was a group that would follow me around everywhere I went. They called themselves Mente Morte. There were 5 men who dressed in black and wore different masks. They never approached me, but I swear they would follow me from a distance and watch me. But ever since I've been on my medicine, they've left me alone. But, here's the problem. I've never told anyone about Mente Morte. Not a single person, not even my mother. But I think Dr. Morrison knows about them. Now, if I'm being honest, he hasn't explicitly mentioned but there's a few suspicious things he's said and done. For example, during one session a couple weeks ago, Dr. Morrison asked if anyone has been following me. Any groups or gangs or anything like that. I froze for a second thinking about but quickly shook my head. But the worst was yet to come. Last night, unable to fall asleep, I decided to take a walk outside. I live in a quiet neighborhood, so I figured it would be alright this late at night. As I turned the corner headed to the park, I saw a small car bathed in the orange light of a single lamppost. Surrounding the car stood 5 men, talking with each other, dressed in black. I pressed my body up against the wall and peeked my head around the corner. Underneath the black hoods of their sweatshirts, I could see different faces: a hockey mask, a Guy Fawkes mask, 2 of those drama-looking masks, and finally, a plain white face. My breathing shortened and I began to shake. As I was freaking out in my head, I heard the car engine start. The headlights shone in my direction and I crouched behind the wall I was at, with my eyes shut tight. I heard the wheels slowly roll over the loose gravel next to me. Without opening my eyes, I could tell the car wasn't stopping, but was turning. It was turning to go to my house. As the car slowly drove down, I started to follow it. They must not have seen me, and were trying instead to find me at my house. I decided to follow the car behind some bushes. The car pulled into the driveway and only one person got out, the one with the plain white face. He went up to the door, and to my shock, opened the door and went inside. Dr. Morrison must have gotten my key from me when I was in the hospital and made a copy. But, all I knew was that he was now in my house, trying to kill me. I turned around to go the other direction, when I saw 4 masked men standing in front of me. I began sprinting back towards the house, but ended up tripping. And that's the last thing I remembered before waking up in a hospital bed. They said I had been found lying in the street with several self-inflicted cuts on my arms. But I knew the truth. This morning I had a meeting with Dr. Morrison. I didn't bring up just did the usual back and forth. At one point, Dr. Morrison's secretary poked her head in. "Michael, there's someone who need you real quick." He got up to take care of business, and when the door had shut, I looked over his desk, and inside of one of the slightly open drawers, I could see the outline of a plain white face with black eyes and mouth. I heard the doorknob begin to turn and quickly sat down. Dr. Morrison came over, gave me my week's medicine and sent me home. But as I was leaving his office, I could feel his eyes on me. I threw the pills in my mouth and forced them down. My name is Drew the bipolar schizo and I think my psychiatrist is trying to kill me. Story 10, Snowfall. So this story has been told at family occasions pretty much as long as I can remember. and it still is one of the scariest things that has ever happened to someone I know. Just a little backstory before we get started. This happened to my grandparents back in 1974. They lived in northern Ontario, Canada, on a very secluded, rural strip of country road. Their closest neighbor was a 15-minute drive away. This occurred in the middle of February. Their entire farm property was covered in a thick blanket of snow. The house was your typical farmhouse. Behind it to the right was their crops, now dead of course, and about 60 feet behind their house was their barn. And beyond that was a massive woodland area. Nothing but evergreen trees that seemed to go on for miles. God, I loved playing on that farm as a kid, until they told me this story, that is. So on the morning of February 17th, my grandma said that she woke up in a panic. You know, like when you have those dreams that you fall and right when you're about to hit the ground you wake up freaking out. She described it like that. She didn't startle my grandpa awake though. Because we later found out that they were getting separated, and he was sleeping in the basement at this point. It's sad how relationships that seem so full of love to you crumble behind closed doors. Now that we're all adults, they told us the truth. They really only stayed together until my mom started her own life. They didn't hate each other or anything, they just sort of fell out of love. Anyway, after she was jolted awake from her dreams, she instantly realized that the house was freezing. This is unusual because they always kept the furnace on full blast in the winter. If you guys have never felt a Canadian winter before, be thankful. Her first thought was to check if her window was somehow not all the way shut. But it was locked. She noticed the draft coming from downstairs, and the smell of one of my grandpa's Marlboros burning. She walked out into the hallway and noticed that the front door was slightly open. Frail gusts of wind were getting snowflakes all over the welcome mat. "Richard?" she called out. There was no reply. She put on her slippers and made her way downstairs and out onto the porch, where she says she saw my grandpa sitting on the patio chair smoking a cigarette. "Richard." She snapped her fingers at him, and he only then acknowledged her presence. "Good to see you," he said. My grandma shut the front door and walked over to sit down on the chair beside him. "It's not good to see you, you bastard. Why did you leave the door open? We're in the middle of winter, for Christ's sake," my grandma said to him in a kind of joking around manner. He didn't change his expression once, he just shed his cigarette and lit up another one. Now my grandma was starting to worry. She noticed in the ashtray that there was about 15 cigarettes that were shed. This was weird to her because she usually empties it every night, and this was around 6:30 in the morning. Also, my grandpa wasn't a chain smoker. Sure, he loved to smoke a lot when he drinks, but what smoker doesn't? Chain smoking is something she's never seen him do before. "Hey, is everything okay with you?" she said. He looked out into the distance, watching the snowfall for an awkward pause, before turning to her and saying, "I found something in the woods." She didn't know how to react to that statement. He seemed so calm and not himself, she said. Even his voice sounded different. "What do you mean you? When did you even go out back to the woods? What did you see?" He once again just stared off into the snowfall. At this point my grandma was shivering from the cold and couldn't take any more of this nonsense. She stood up and said, "This is ridiculous. I'm going to go put on a pot of coffee, and get a housecoat. Come inside, Richard. You're starting to scare me." He stared at her as he yet again shed out the other cigarette. "I want you to come see what I found in the woods," he said. "What? It's fucking freezing. Get inside, Richard." She replied back, getting annoyed and quite creeped out by this point. All of a sudden she said he stood up and full-on sprinted off the porch and to the right of the house, running past the garage. "Richard. Richard, where are you going? Get back here." She was extremely worried about my grandpa at this point. She followed him down the porch, but her slippers caused her to slip on the wet, slushy steps, and she fell hard on her back. She said at this point she started to cry from the pain, but she crawled towards the end of the garage and looked out into the backyard. She said all she saw was his footprints in a perfectly straight line headed straight for the tree line beyond the barn. But here's where things get truly terrifying. She sat in the snow confused as to what in the flying fuck is going on, when all of a sudden my grandpa came running out the front door calling her name. She turned around towards the porch to see him coming to help her out. "What the hell are you doing out here, Arlene? Are you okay?" She then proceeded to tell him what I just told you. My grandpa took her back inside because at this point she was getting frantic with fear. She kept on mumbling things like, "But I just was talking to you. And the woods, what did you find in the woods?" My grandpa did see the footprints, he even followed them with his rifle all the way to the tree line. But he said whatever it was stopped dead in front of the woods. He could see that there were absolutely no other footprints beyond that one point, just a blanket of untouched snow. He also said that he didn't want to go further because an immense sense of dread and panic washed over him. He said that if he had gone into the woods, he felt like he wouldn't be coming back. He eventually came back to the house, and they didn't end up calling the police because how crazy would that story sound, am I right? But they did end up moving on with their separation, and both of them eventually moved away from that farmhouse about 9 months later. My grandma is still alive today, and her story hasn't changed one word for the past 40 years. Whatever it was that she was talking to was definitely not my grandpa, and whatever was in the woods, well, I never want to find out. Story 11. That's not my sister. I am babysitting currently for a family who is a friend of my parents. I'm watching their 6-year-old son and their 10-year-old daughter. I am getting paid $50 to watch them till 12 p.m. and I now think that the money is worth nothing. Let me explain. I had known I was going to be babysitting these kids for about a week now, so I had plenty of time to come up with fun games and things we could do. I even brought my old Ds and some board games. I pulled up to the house around 5ish. I was warmly welcomed. The mother told me to call if anything happened. I smiled happily and said I would, but there would not be any issues. I noticed the father shifting nervously, glancing at the little girl sitting on the couch. The mother walked outside and shouted for him to hurry. Before he left, he gave me a worried smile and walked out the door. I didn't think much of it. Now I wish I had. I went over to the kids. The girl smiled and dragged me and her younger brother into her bedroom to do our nails, but the boy was quiet. He hasn't smiled or said a word to me since I've been here. Later we played some games. It was around 7. The parents said to put them to bed by 7:30. I put down my Uno cards and clapped my hands together. "I think it's time for bed," I said cheerfully. The girl who was just about to say something stopped, her jaw 1/3 open mid-word. She just stared at me, her head twitched to the side. Before I could register what was happening, the little boy grabbed my hand and dragged me to the bathroom, locking the door behind him. He was trying to push the heavy cabinet in their bathroom over the door. I asked him what was happening. He looked at me, his pupils the size of dots. I don't know why, but I'm happy that I decided that if whatever was going on scared him this bad, I should help. We shoved the cabinet in front of the door and then I heard a sickening thud on the bathroom door just as we got the cabinet in front of it. I looked at the boy. He was curled up in a ball, in the corner of the bathroom sobbing. "What's wrong?" I asked him. "What is happening? Is your sister okay? Are you okay?" Questions were running out of my mouth a million miles per hour. He looked at me, tears running down his face. "She does this when she hates someone." He paused. "She wants to kill you." "What? Why?" I was frozen in place. Why was this small girl after me? "She's a monster, a crazy person." He whispered. "What?" I said, sitting beside him. My eyes wide. Disbelief written all over my face. "My parents don't believe me, but my sister died a long time ago." He looked at me, tears streaming down his face. "That is not my sister. It's a monster in her body. It took her when I was 4 and it won't give her back." He said the last word with hurt and confusion. He let out a hiccuping sob. Another sickening thud hit the door and a scream from the other side that made my blood run cold. It was inhuman. This is where I sit now on the bathroom floor, a 6-year-old huddled next to me as a 10-year-old tries to kill us. Please someone help. She's going to break the door soon. We are trapped. She, whatever it is going to kill us.